According to official estimates compiled in the early 1980s, the number of women who served in the Vietnam War was around 15,000. Some two-thirds were members of the armed forces, but the rest were civilians, USO workers, entertainers, volunteers, and Red Cross personnel. In January 1995, I talked to some of the women who served, as well as some young actors involved in a production that sought to remember what they went through.
It made me feel numb. It was overwhelming. It brought up an awful lot of intense feelings, and it just made me feel numb. I didn't want to feel them again.
Gail Davies served as a nurse in Vietnam. Early in 1993, she attended a play taken from a book of interviews with women who had been part of the U.S. involvement in the war. The book was A Piece of My Heart by Keith Walker, the collected stories of 26 women who had served in various capacities in Vietnam. Walker wrote the book in the mid-1980s. A year later, it was adapted for the stage. Seeing a performance by the Off-Street Players, a Tallahassee community theater company, Davies commented on the play's realism.
It's a reflection of what the woman's experience of Vietnam was, from all different points of view. And I think it's also a testament to the courage of women, the flexibility, the endurance of women.
In a little tiny room with me, and then the double doors burst open, and in comes a stretcher with a POW that shot the 5 GIs. And I look, and he looks like my sister's son.
Kid of 15, badly hurt, take care of him.
He shot the 5 GIs?
He's badly hurt, take care of him.
I can't touch him.
For nurses in particular, the Vietnam experience was different than any war in history. None of their training had prepared them for the magnitude of the task and the concentrated horror of a war where proximity to and faster transportation from the front lines vastly increased the number of seriously wounded that must be dealt with quickly.
One of the things that was so surprising was that the fact that the nurses were thrown into hell, basically. They were thrown into hell, and they had to completely rework their psyches to do the job. My character puts a wall up and stays behind the wall until the end of the play. These women were nurses, but they were more than nurses. They were caretakers, they were psychologists, they were morticians, they were all these things that the military dumped on them.
Elizabeth Chestnut plays a nurse, and Paula Held plays an entertainer in the production. Many of the actors admitted to being amazed at the intensity of the women's experiences in the war and their own reactions to the issues portrayed.
I felt a lot of anger at learning about how dispensable human life was there, especially the GIs, and that the nurses were expected to patch them up to get them back into the battlefield and let some die if they were worse off than others. That it was just a constant stream of men, constant stream of boys, really. They had to make decisions about human life. They had to make decisions as to who to let die and who not to let die.
Oh, God. I've got to go home. I've got to go home. Wanting to go and not wanting to go.
Best year of my life. Worst year of my life. I don't care how I get out of here, but somebody just get me out of here.
In the first half of A Piece of My Heart, a cast of 6 women and 1 man act out not only the fear and anguish of the experience from a woman's perspective, but also the care, compassion, and the small triumphs of the nurses, USO workers, and even some of the entertainers who toured the war scene. But if the women who went overseas were not prepared for the war, they were even less equipped to deal with the reception they found back home. In the play's second half, the war is over, and the women are left to deal with the aftermath, trying to sort out their lives and falling prey to the same stress disorders as the male vets.
It was not your fault. None of it was your fault. Do you hear me, Sissy? None of it was your fault. But you can be sad if you want to. You can mourn if you want to. That's no crime.
Women who served in Vietnam have the same kinds of adjustment problems as the men who served, but traditionally they have not felt that they could come forth for treatment for several reasons.
Maria Gilbert is a psychologist with the Bay Pines VA Medical Center near St. Petersburg.
Number one, nobody ever acknowledged they were veterans. Number two, they didn't consider themselves combat veterans, so they shouldn't be having these problems. And number three, most of them were in the healthcare field. They were taking care of other people, and traditionally healthcare givers don't seek treatment for themselves. And so when you combine that, all of those factors, they've not come forth for treatment, although they probably needed it for a long time.
For the women still today, the issue is whether or not they can actually say they were Vietnam veterans if they just acted as nurses. And that's still very present. In fact, one of the women who appears in the book and served in Vietnam was saying that some of them don't even consider themselves Vietnam veterans to this day.
But for others, like Peggy Myclonis, Women Veterans Coordinator of Tampa's VA Hospital, the play provides an important source of validation for feelings and experiences long kept in hiding and even denied.
It does validate, and it makes me proud to say that I was there. But more so is to let the general public actually see what we felt, because you're right, for years nobody ever wanted to even hear about it. Nobody ever, when I first came home, if I had not had my family support, that was the only, my friends didn't want to hear about it, nobody I associated with. I even found that the nurses that I was in Vietnam with, some of us lived together, but we never talked about Vietnam because it wasn't okay to talk about it, because when we were with other people, they didn't want to hear about it.
During 1995, A Piece of My Heart is playing at various locations throughout Florida. Its director and producer is Patricia Gordon Dominguez.
One of the most important things about this show is that it really is real life words, real life experiences. Somebody didn't dream this up. People lived this. This show is about more than just women in Vietnam. This is about the way people handle conflicts, the way that people deal with war, with violence, rejection, and fear. When you experience this show, you can't help but pull pieces of it to your own life experiences.
Seeing the play and seeing how wonderfully they portray the nurses in the different roles, it validates my experience, it validates all of ours. And after I've watched the play a few times, the first time left me numb, but it hasn't stayed numb afterwards. I, for the first time in my life, was proud to say I was a nurse in Vietnam.
I'm Bill Dudley. With funds provided by the Florida Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs, this report was produced by the Florida Humanities Council.